Yama. My name is Marley Silver. I'm a proud Aboriginal woman from the Gamilaroi and Dunghutti tribes of New South Wales. On behalf of the Imperfects podcast, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the country on which this podcast is created, and in this, honour the ways in which their elders past and present have cared for and nurtured their lands and waterways for millennia. I extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people connected to each of the hundreds of countries that make up the continent of so-called Australia, and any of my brothers and sisters listening to this episode. I pay my respects to our leaders and knowledge keepers, past and present. Find strength in our survival for over 60,000 years, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Always was, always will be.
Quick! Is anyone here a doctor? Yes, her name is Dr. Emily, and she's a psychologist. Please welcome to the Imperfects, our very own psychologist!
Okay. I'll never regret that opener. That feels right. It feels good and it set the right tone. But this is a big change up we've got happening here today, Hugh.
Yeah, substitution.
Yeah, massive substitution. People may remember that Dr. Emily usually would be calling in, usually would be over Zoom, a remote session.
A telehealth session with our own psychologist, Dr. Emily.
But today there's been a swap, and Josh, you are over telehealth of sorts.
Yeah, definitely of sorts.
You're away.
Yep, I'm away.
But the good news is, in the studio is our very own psychologist, Dr. Emily. Dr. Emily, it's so good to have you here in person.
It's so great.
Emily, I have had so many messages about you, like so many people wanting to, get in touch with you, which doesn't really work for the anyway.
Great. Are you nervous yet?
But yeah, everyone loved your first episode, or your first and second episode. So it's wonderful to have you here in person.
Thank you.
Our own psychologist is in the building, so welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here. In person is so much better.
Yeah, I think so too.
Sorry, Josh.
But Josh, you and I think, are a bit more nervous than usual because the control panel for the microphones is closest to Hugh in this particular seating setup. So Hugh, you're in charge of the controls.
So whenever I get off a flight and I walk past the cockpit and the doors open and you can see into the cockpit, all the buttons and everything, I always think to myself, I never give pilots enough credit for how good they are, what they do, and how hard that must be. Like, where do you even start? I'm feeling the exact same thing right now. Josh, I have never, ever given you enough credit. I have got the control panel in front of me, and I'm freaking out, and I'm how you manage to ask good questions and do the controls of the Rodecaster Pro.
Yeah, I
have no idea.
I can't see any practical differences between controlling the microphones for this show and flying a commercial jet. I can't see the difference.
Yeah, it's not insulting to pilots at all.
No, exactly.
Well, from my perspective, I didn't know exactly how the room was going to be set up, so I just logged on to our Zoom here. And the moment I saw the order that you guys were in and saw Hugh was sitting in front of the console, I got very nervous for today's show.
Hugh, there's probably you should explain the reason why you have to be facing M. Yeah, because originally you were supposed to be here and I was supposed to be in charge of the control panel, but I was like, no, Hugh has to be facing Emily. And why is that?
Well, a few years ago, I was doing a talk at a school, it was a parent night, and I was about halfway through, and the audience was sitting in it was a very strange angle they were sitting in. It was a community hall, and the screen was in a really strange space. So I had to look at the screen, then the audience and the screen, and I noticed halfway through I was getting quite dizzy. Yeah. And I thought, this is strange. This hasn't happened to me before, but that's okay. I'll keep going because I'm talking about resilience. I can't stop and say I'm dizzy.
Never show a weakness.
Yeah. And then about probably 10 minutes later, the dizziness was out of control, and then I couldn't see for a second. I literally couldn't see. And I remember thinking, I'm in trouble here. But then I remember I had another thought of this is a cool story. How resilient am I? I can't see anything and I'm going to keep going. And I kept talking.
Blind?
Yeah, I couldn't see anything.
You really couldn't see anything?
No, it just went blank. Everything went blank. And it felt like a couple of minutes. It was probably 5 seconds. And the next thing I know, I just collapsed on the floor.
Oh, you collapsed?
Yeah, in front of there was 350 people parents in this room, and I just collapsed.
Yeah, and everyone who had notebooks writing down what you were saying, all the notebooks went down at once. He doesn't know what he's talking about, does he?
No, I ended up in hospital, and it turned out it was just a really severe episode of vertigo. And ever since that day, I can't look to the left or to the right. I just have to look straight ahead of me, basically.
Well, currently you're looking to the right to talk to me. Is this?
Yeah, it feels. I've got this. I can't do this much longer.
Yeah, this is like an extreme sport for you. Yeah. What's going on right now? Living on the edge.
Recording our podcast around a circular table was an issue.
Yeah, that is probably a bit of an issue. Okay, well, to help
Thanks
you
for
out,
coming in, Em.
Yeah, exactly.
Pleasure.
But to help you out, Hugh, maybe we get to the point where Emily can actually start speaking, and
So I can look straight ahead.
So you can look straight ahead.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Emily, today, so as you do, you bring in a clip or something from a previous episode of ours, and you'll use that clip to then talk about something that you think might be helpful to people. What do you want to talk about today?
So I actually wanted to talk about the episode with Hamish.
Oh, yep.
And I realised that you guys did such an incredible job with the bonus episode. And in fact, a lot of the stuff that was in there really, I really thought was so profound and really, really well done. But there was something a little bit kind of unrelated to what you talked about in the bonus episode that I thought might be quite useful to explore a little bit.
Yeah. Well, just for those people just catching up, so the Hamish Blake did like a vulnerability house where he talked about self-doubt, and then about a week later, the three of us, me, Hugh and Josh, we got together and kind of reflected on that episode, which is the bonus episode you're talking about. Yeah.
But the clip I have is actually from the original episode with Hamish, the vulnerability house.
But just to clarify, the bonus ep with just the three of us was very profound. Your words, you said, yeah, okay,
yep.
Cool, interesting.
Beautifully done. Yeah.
Okay. You said it. Not my words. The words of Dr. Emily. So, okay, cool.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah.
So perhaps we could play that clip now?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
And actually, before we play the clip, I think the context for people who haven't heard this, or just as a refresher for people who have, Ryan, you just said to Hamish that you were feeling uneasy about Hamish and I being friends.
Yep.
Because you were concerned that we had a lot in common, you know, cricket and exercise and stuff, that perhaps you felt you might get cut out because of that.
Yeah, I felt threatened.
Yeah,
I guess
yeah.
within the love triangle
yeah.
of the three of us. Okay, so let's play the clip. It is a funny thing, and it does feel good to say it. If nothing else, just so it's, I don't know, just so I'm not maybe carrying it, and maybe it was a kind of heavy thing, because I thought about calling you, Hames, before to talk about it and say that, and I just didn't. But I'm glad I've said it now. But I'm also conscious of I don't want everything that I say vulnerably to be on the podcast. I don't want to make it like this thing that I save for good content. But it just, it is what it is now.
I got bad news for you. It is good content because.
It was good content. It was right. Spot on. So Em, so based on that, what sort of topic or area did you want to?
So the thing that really, I guess, struck me or stood out to me about that was the feeling of authenticity and truth that seemed to show up when you kind of acknowledge that to Hamish. And then that kind of got me thinking a little bit more broadly around what Rick Hansen, who is a psychologist and author, frames as the challenge of truth versus harmony, and how that shows up.
Yep.
I mean, just so many bells have gone off in my head.
Yeah.
Truth versus harmony. Yeah.
And when you disclose that, or when you shared that with everybody, it really stood out to me that was a moment for you of truth, of real acknowledgement and truth in how you were feeling.
Yeah, it was very true to me. And yeah, even you saying like truth versus harmony, the harmonious path, I guess, in that situation would be, well, the really harmonious path would be to not start this podcast. That would have been the most harmonious thing I could have done. But because we were doing it and I was having the conversation, instead of, even in that episode, I could have not even said it, actually. I could have not spoken about it, because in the lead up to that episode, I thought, well, I could talk about this or I could not. It was certainly something I was feeling, truthfully. but yeah, to say it out loud, it felt good. It felt good. Yeah.
And when Rick Hansen talks about it, he kind of really, I guess, posits that so often in our really important relationships, we choose harmony because we care about the other people, right? But often in the long term, we don't get either harmony or truth because of the consequences, like the longer term consequences of us continually, I guess, compromising our needs and truth over having a harmonious relationship.
So it might be harmony for the other person, but it doesn't bring harmony for us long term, really.
Yeah.
Well, this is huge in my life, and I feel like it would be for a lot of people. I remember, so Em, you and I have chatted about this very thing before. I can't remember, we had a phone call, this is a couple of months ago, and I just come out of an hour-long session with my psychologist, and then we chatted. It was like a double psych session.
Wow.
And I said, I've just had the most amazing session with my psych. And so my psych summarises this, so she has a wonderful analogy for me. I love running, like sprinting I just love it so much. And she knows that this is the analogy she gave. Like, I have terrible hamstrings. My hamstrings stop me running all the time because I'm 41. And that's a problem that's another podcast topic. Actually, let's not do that topic. Anyway.
The topic is 41 an okay age
for your hamstrings. Anyway, she said to me, so for most of your life, she said, you have been about trying to keep other people happy. And she said, so that's like your quadriceps. Like, they're strong and they're very good. They've been a great thing for you. It's probably helped the Resilience Project be successful because you are able to do what other people want all the time. But your hamstrings are terrible. And she said, your hamstrings, the ability to actually speak your truth and say, this is what I'd actually like right now. This is what I actually need right now. And she said, because my hamstrings are bad, she said, you have terrible hamstrings and you need to work on your hamstrings. And that is where you tell people what is happening for you, what you need, your truth. And then when I said it to you, I went, yep. And I spent ages trying to summarize it to you, and you went, that's truth versus harmony. And she said, when you choose harmony, what it does is it builds resentment. And I nearly fell over.
Say that again.
So Em said, well, we've got Anna over here and I'm telling her what she says.
And I wonder if Em can give us a non-hamstring related example.
Well, basically, not in fact, you can describe the resentment bit.
Well, I can probably talk again more broadly around what the consequences are or what the costs are of choosing harmony. And I suppose if we really look at this, if we zoom out from the word harmony, we could really kind of just look at this in terms of what's called the please and appease response. And that's like a nervous system, learned behaviour response that we have in order to keep ourselves safe in some ways. The costs of that can be quite extensive. But I wonder, before we get to the costs, whether it might be worthwhile exploring maybe how they come about, like that kind of behavioural response comes about.
And I wonder if it would, tell me if this is not helpful, but whether it would be helpful to talk about the psychological just need for safety and just how important that is for everyone, and because I feel like that is connected.
100%.
The harmony.
But can we give an example of, and also what that might look like in a relationship? Because it pops up for me in two areas of my life. First of all, relationship, and second of all, working life, where with work, people say, can you come and speak here? Please come and speak here. And I'm so tired. Every year, I get to the end of the year, I'm so burnt out because people say, can you come and do this talk? And I go, and in my head, I'm like, I can't, I'm exhausted. I can't. And I go, yep, sure. And then I end up resenting, there's so much resentment around the amount of talking that I'm doing. That's because I choose harmony over truth. And then in a relationship point of view, I remember my psychologist saying to me, she said, one of the big issues is so many people will start to resent their partner and have really negative thoughts about their relationship because their needs aren't being met, but they've never, ever once communicated what their needs actually are, because they don't actually feel. And I think about a past relationship where I had where my partner, this is going like a long time, but wanted to hang out all the time, always together. And I just loved my own time, but I chose harmony. So I was like, yep, let's hang out all the time. And I never once said to her, and it built resentment. I got really resentful, and I never once said, I just like to have some time to myself. It doesn't matter I love you. I just want some time to myself. And then I got resentful, so much resentment to her, but I never spoke my truth. I just chose harmony because I didn't want to upset her. So I guess I'm just trying to give practically, for people who are going, oh, is that me? Is that someone I know? That's what it kind of looks like in 2 areas of my life. I don't know if that helps people listening to.
I think they're great examples and really common too, so common. But I think kind of coming back to your question, Ryan, around
safety.
Yes,
yeah,
that was it. From a very fundamental level, we all have a need to belong, right? And that need to belong prompts us to seek attachment. And if we go back to childhood, that attachment is with our primary caregivers. And so in like a healthy family, then we have our needs met by our parents. And we are primed to seek attachment and to seek security from them. But if that is in any way challenged,
me when you said that.
Sorry.
What are you saying? I guess I require the approval of my parents. I guess so.
So we all, like, till the day we die, we usually seek, whether we're aware of it or not, we seek the approval of our parents and the people around us. But as children in particular, if we have an environment that perhaps isn't as supportive, then that can really set kind of like a fertile ground for us to become or to work in that environment to make ourselves feel as safe as possible. And this doesn't happen for everybody, but for some people, when we have an environment where there might be a more critical parent or a parent that is neglectful, or it might be that a parent is actually that both parents are really conflict avoidant, then we never really learn how to approach conflict and how to express our needs. Does that resonate?
Oh, yeah. Bullseye.
Yeah. We can have either like really a critical, like perhaps even abusive context, or we can have a context where parents don't ever approach conflict at all.
Can I just made a bit of a joke about your parents there? Obviously, just to clarify, the area that is the bullseye is that there wasn't much conflict in your home. I just don't want people thinking it was abusive.
No. Thank you. No. Exactly.
So I met your parents the other day, and it was that's clearly what it is. Just
No, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So there are those two contexts, but there's also another one, and that is that in society and in culture, in general in our culture, being accommodating is really rewarded and really reinforced. So it might be that we get told, for example, that was really nice of you to do that, or that was really kind of you to wait your turn, or that was really good of you not to ask for that when everyone else was yelling for it. Does that kind of make sense?
Yep.
Yep. So we get really reinforced for being accommodating and being like the good boy or the good girl. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, but sometimes those sorts of conditions or those sorts of, I guess, environments can expose us to the belief that we need to please other people in order to be okay.
In order to be safe.
Yep, in order to be safe.
Belong and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, yeah. So don't, it's the whole thing of like, don't make waves, don't make a fuss, don't be difficult.
Exactly, yeah. And if we look at it kind of at the, I guess, the really traumatic end of the spectrum, it's actually a very, very adaptive skill. Like if you have an abusive parent, that child learns, if I stay quiet, if I do exactly as my parent wants me to do, then I will avoid harm. So it's hugely adaptive and very skillful. But obviously that may not be the case for everyone that's in that kind of environment.
I think maybe even not kids who are even not in abusive in situations will learn. Like I'm watching our 2-year-old at the moment, Elsie. We're very, very loving parents, probably a bit over the top sometimes, if that's possible. But she is trying so hard to please us. Like she brings me things, because once I was getting changed and she bought me my shoes, I couldn't believe it. And I made such a big deal about it. So every single time I sit on the bed now to get changed, she just brings me things. She's bringing me so many things. And I wonder if that's like because she's got such a good response, she wants to do something for someone else. And when her brother's upset, she'll go and hug him, which is beautiful to watch. But we make such a big deal of it. She's like, I want to make other, like if he gets upset, she'll go hug, and she'll try and hug him.
Okay.
And I feel like it's like, it's just we made such a big deal of it. She's like, make other people happy. That's why I'll do that. And I wonder if that, like she's learning it from she's 2 and she's already learning that. Is that like adaptive behaviour?
I mean, absolutely adaptive. But I mean, also some of that can be temperament. So like obviously temperament is something that we're born with. We don't create that. Yeah. But it can be reinforced in certain environments. But she might be also more like more perceptive or more emotionally in tune to her environment. And then she does get rewarded, which is, again, that's a really nice thing. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
So then there's clearly then a clear line somewhere between harmony and kindness, and just like being kind, because that could also be seen as just like kindness, like doing things for other people is encouraged, and we know that makes you feel good, and it's a good thing to do good things for other people. So would you be able to explain the difference?
I think for me, the fundamental difference is that it crosses a line in terms of when it compromises your own needs.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so if we translate that into like when you're an adult, often what happens for really chronic people pleasers, or people that are constantly choosing harmonious relationships, is that there can be a complete disconnection from who you are as a person, what your identity is, what your values are, because the aim for those people is to, at all costs, secure attachment from the other person. And that may not even be just one person. It probably really translates generally. So it might even be something small as like finding it difficult to complain to a waiter that the food is cold. Or it might be returning an item to a store, or it could be on a bigger end of the spectrum, asking for, like I said before here, like asking for time on your own. So it really can kind of be quite pervasive.
I feel like that could be a great test of if people are like, am I harmony versus truth? Next time you're not happy with your coffee or whatever it is that comes out, just think of what your response is, because for me, I'm never taking it back.
I couldn't either.
I'm drinking a horrible coffee every day of the week rather than saying to someone I'm not happy.
Which is harmony.
Yeah. Which is harmony. So and what happens is you resent the cafe a bit.
Yeah.
So then, Dr. M, for people like us, 3 people pleasers, harmony seekers, or harmony keepers, we've, like I'll speak for myself, like someone I've never really telling the truth as opposed to keeping it harmonious is uncomfortable. So good example is the coffee. Like the coffee's no good, or it's cold, or it's the wrong coffee, but not wrong enough that it's worth taking back, just like a little bit wrong. What's a good way to be able to, I guess, as people say, like lean into that, the discomfort of that? Like, is there a way to do that that is easier than?
Yeah. So
it's going to keep me safe.
I know. Don't ever go to that coffee shop ever again.
True.
So I guess there are a couple of things. The first is just being aware. And I know this probably sounds really cliched to say you need to be aware of this as an issue, but fundamentally it shows up so often in my sessions with my clients is that it becomes like an automatic behavior. So we don't even notice that we're doing that, or we don't even think or pause to change anything. So the first thing is really kind of checking in, what are my triggers? So when is it that I'm people pleasing? But also, how does this show up in the body? Like if you thought about approaching the cafe shop and saying, this is cold, what do you notice happens in the body?
Yeah.
And when you realize that there's this space to, I guess, assert yourself, you might notice that there's an activation, and I think I speak about this every session, an activation of fight or flight response.
Can I actually, if we go back a step to the moment when you have the coffee, you get given the coffee and you realize it's not what you wanted. That feeling sometimes that I get is one of like, I don't deserve this, or it's that feeling.
What do you mean?
Well, that feeling of like, this is unfair. Like,
okay.
I'm busy, or like I've been waiting for 10 minutes for this and now they've done this to me. Like that feeling, like I don't necessarily take it personally, but depending on my mood coming up to that moment, I could take that worse than is objectively appropriate. I don't know if there's anything worth mentioning about that, but that's just how I sometimes would feel. Like usually I'm fine, like who cares? But every now and again, like traffic is a good example, or when you get wronged, quote unquote, like you feel like you're getting wronged, or they didn't listen to your order well enough and you're annoyed at them or something like that. And then going back, I guess, I don't know if this is a different topic or not, but to speak your truth versus, I don't know, I don't really know where I'm going with that. But
No, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I'm shutting down. Cool. Let's just wrap up the episode.
No, I think that's important. Because
Good.
because I'm wondering if in the past that kind of experience would have stopped there. So it would have been like, I'm just going to have to cop this cold coffee
And be annoyed about it.
and be annoyed about it.
Yeah.
And there might be something that kind of sits with you for a little bit of time after that.
Yes.
But I wonder what it would be like to go, oh, here's that feeling again. And so being able to notice like, oh, that's interesting. Here's that story showing up again that like, I don't deserve this.
This now I feel like it's a proper example or comparison to the Hamish chat where it's like, not saying something, then the resentment builds or the frustration builds. But to then say it in a calm and compassionate way meant that frustration or that resentment that could fester over time if I didn't say it didn't happen. And I guess on a smaller scale, the coffee is kind of similar.
Yep.
Whereas like if I walked away with that coffee that I felt is not what I deserved and I felt annoyed that they didn't listen to me or whatever, and I walk away and I'm just annoyed for the rest of the thing, I never go back to that cafe to teach them a lesson as opposed to just saying, hey, I think I ordered, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. And they just give you an answer, which is completely understandable because they made a mistake or they didn't think about it or they didn't listen. Who cares? Then I don't get the bad day and I do get to go back to my favourite cafe instead of like writing them off even though I've been going for 6 years.
Yeah, that's exactly in. That's exactly in. And so you have to sit, I mean, I've said this before, but you have to sit with that discomfort in order to be able to ask for what you need. And what you needed in that example is to have like a hot coffee. Yeah. And so the moment that you do that and then you hear the response is not always, but often it's not what you predict it to be. And what I mean by that is we usually misinterpret or mispredict people's anger at our request or our need for something. So that tendency to really think that an outcome will be far worse than it actually is.
We mispredict it.
Yeah. So we really kind of tend to over-predict an anger response. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Totally. So without wanting to talk too much about Penny and my relationship, but I'm always looking back on COVID with this, I know it's still happening now, but I'm not saying thank God for COVID, but one of the things that came up for us in our relationship because of COVID, like locked in the house together for 7 months or more than that, 260 days, whatever it was. One of the things that came up through sessions with my psychologist was that I was unhappy with a few things in our relationship, but I'd never expressed that to Penny or talked to her about it. And it was things that I needed from the relationship, and I'd never once communicated them to her. And my psychologist said, that's because your hamstrings are really weak and you don't do this. And you go with your quadriceps, which is keep everyone happy, keep Penny happy. And I was getting resentful at Penny for not doing things that I'd never communicated to her. Anyway, because of COVID, this all came up. And I remember so clearly the night where I said, here are some of the things that are happening for me that I need. And I'd felt so uncomfortable. Like it was so hard. And I felt
Talking to Penny about it.
Yeah, what I needed from a relationship that was, and it was so difficult, but I completely mispredicted what her response was going to be, and her response has made our relationship so much better because she's like, okay, yep, I hear that, and that I understand that makes sense. I'll try my best. And
oh God, how did you feel after that?
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
I felt like going out and celebrating. Like I felt like
you were just thinking, I should have asked for more. That was way too easy.
But it almost,
and like $1,000 a week, and like a holiday by myself to my own telly.
It almost felt like a cheat code. I was like, that was so like it was hard doing it, but then after it's just been amazing for our relationship, and it's come up a few times since. But then even it reminded me when you said that to Hamish in that episode, to bring it back to the whole context of this episode, when you said that to Hamish, not only was it really good for you two, but it was great for me as well to hear you say, here's something I'm a bit worried about. I mean, it was really for Hamish, I think, but for me to hear that, I had the same feeling of like, oh, that is such a relief that that's been said. Like that is because if you hadn't said that to Hamish, there would have been if Hamish and I are becoming mates off to the side, it would just there'd be a bit of resentment in you, or you'd be uncomfortable with it. And then if I was to say to you, oh, catching up with Hamish, there'd be a bit of resentment. And because you said that, all of a sudden we're aware of it and there's no resentment now. It doesn't feel like there's any.
Yeah, no.
Because you said your truth. Like you said, here's the truth. I'm not going to go with Harmony because Harmony is to let us just be friends and you'll suffer in silence by yourself.
Yeah.
That's what it does. It's like this superpower or this. It's like it feels like a cheat code because you do it and you're like, oh, I've got access to the next level here of this relationship. That's sort of what it feels like to me.
And I think what showed up in that episode and also in the bonus episode too was the fact that when you're able to speak your truth, you then actually end up having a far greater sense of connection and authenticity in your relationships.
Yeah, definitely.
And that is what, again, kind of coming back to Rick Hansen, the more often we're choosing harmony, the less we actually get of it in the end. And so the costs of being continuously focused on the needs of the other person is that, again, we lose contact with what's actually important to us, and then those feelings of resentment build. And often what can happen is that when we are constantly taking on the needs of other people, at some point it becomes like a pressure cooker. And so for some people, we take on more and more and more, and then at some point or another, like there's like a tipping point, and then we explode. And then it comes out.
Not literally.
No.
Hopefully
not.
I've never seen that before.
So then it can.
Just like random walking down the street and someone explodes. Oh, yeah, well, too harmonious.
But for other people, the explosion is that you suddenly have an outburst that is completely unregulated. So it's this moment of dysregulation that tips you over into anger, an expression of anger. And so it can be that, like, maybe it's something like your partner left the dishes on the sink, and perhaps it's like the 100th time that's happened and you've not said anything for 100 times. But then that 100th time happens and then it just like tips you over the edge. But what happens is that your anger outburst or that expression of anger actually ends up damaging the relationship so much more than if you had expressed the need for the dishes to be done like 50 times before that. And perhaps if it doesn't lead to an explosion of feelings of anger, it might actually move in the other direction. So it might be that we're internalizing all of these feelings of anger, and that then leads you to feel depressed. It might lead you to feel really empty, but also like this sense that no one really sees you in the world. So like whenever we're compliant or like really reaching out to make sure everyone else is okay, it's like we're teaching the other person that we're on board with them. So like in the example that you gave, Hugh, the fact that you've never expressed those needs before, obviously we're not mind readers, so we don't know. Like when we're expressing that this is okay, we're showing it by saying, yes, I'll do that for you. So I'm totally on board with this. But if we continue to do that, then the other person never knows that we're not on board.
That last bit you just said is really fascinating because the one thing that didn't quite work for me in this whole analogy was, I know I've never really exploded anyone. I've never really had that explosion, but I did have feelings of loneliness. Like not didn't feel depressed, but I felt a bit lonely in it all. Like, or a bit, not trapped is the right word, but just, oh, well, that's just the way it's going to be for me. And it's quite a lonely
accepting
thing.
Or something, like in a bad way.
Well, it's like resignation.
Yeah, okay, there you go. That's why we've got a psychologist here. Resignation, resigned to the fact that this is the way it is for me. Unfortunately, it's not great for me, but that's just the way it is. And all I had to do was say, hey, I think I need this. And that was it. That was Penny and I go the next level. Cheat code, awesome.
I didn't realise that I was doing this. I'm a big time harmonizer, I guess, harmony over truth. And I've noticed many times in my life, I've sort of, when someone's done something that's wronged me, to use that language, I've often just kind of, rather than confront it, I end up sort of just not seeing them as much. I might sort of just end up if it's a big enough wrong, I'll just sort of phase them out of my life, or if they're doing things I'm not happy with, I don't see them again. And it strikes me as, and you could apply it to the coffee analogy, but it also strikes me as really unfair on that person because they're completely unaware that they've done something wrong, and I'm making this big judgment on them purely because I'm not willing to confront the truth of the situation. So in the case of the coffee, you're making a decision that it's a bad coffee shop and you're not going to go there, and you'll tell your friends don't get coffee there because it's always cold. Whereas, in fact, that person might have just made a mistake, something might have happened, and you haven't given them the chance to actually right the wrong.
Where does... Because, I know someone who runs a cafe, and there's... What?
This is a very practical, are you wanting to talk to me about coffees being cold?
No.
Let people speak their truth, mate.
Well, the problem that he often has is when a customer isn't happy with their coffee or their meal, but instead of saying something, they'll go to Facebook or Google reviews and leave like a really scathing review, as because they're like, I want to get them back for doing me wrong. So on one hand, they might think in their head, well, I'm speaking the truth, but it's kind of like a sneaky. It's a sneaky truth.
It's very passive aggressive, really.
Passive aggressive,
or just aggressive.
It's resentment. It's the result of resentment, isn't it? They resent. They haven't said anything, so they resent. There's still resentment, so they get it out that way, I guess.
Do we often find ourselves, because this is maybe me psychoanalyzing you, Hugh, inappropriately, but I would imagine, and I think maybe I'm thinking about myself here, but I can imagine that you would reframe that resentment as some form of like nobility, like I'm doing the noble thing here by providing and being a good person in my relationship by making sure everyone's happy. So do people reframe that feeling of and sort of build this story around that to make it feel like it's okay?
That's a really apt reflection, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
another one for Josh. You're on fire.
So, I certainly feel that as far as I've been telling myself since the kids were born. I think it's a saying that I have with my friends or people who are in a similar situation. I always keep saying, it's not about me anymore. It's not. It's about making sure everyone else is. It's just not about me anymore. And in many regards, that's very true. Like I don't get to do everything I want all the time, but I've probably taken it too far, definitely with like, as long as everyone else in the house is happy, then that's got to be the priority. And I do want that to be the case. But I've learned in the last couple of years it can't be at the expense of me starting to resent them, which has happened.
Yeah, it's almost like, I think this is what you're getting at, Josh, where it's like, this is me just trying to get in on the apt reflection. But it's almost like it's like you wear it as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
But it's like, I'm not, I'm above it, or I'm bigger than having to create any conflict. And I'm going to like take the hit and in the interests for the betterment of the group or the relationship. But like you were saying, then when you do that, then you're actually creating less harmony down the track.
Absolutely.
That is so fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I can think in my relationship when I'm doing that, when I'm just trying to do everything for Soph and Charlie, there'll be a point where I start to just get a bit grumpy and I'm not very fun to be around. And I think Soph's actually told me I'd rather you just a bit more selfish and not a grumpy arsehole to be around.
Yeah.
Like it'd be much more enjoyable for us if you just did that thing. Go away, do what you need to do and come back in a better mood.
Oh, I get told that constantly by Jam, where it's like she's just like, why don't you just go do the thing you got to do instead of just like staying quiet and trying to do what you think I want, when she's just like, I just want you to do whatever's going to make you happy. Like don't, and she's right. Like if I'm working all day in my studio and I'm just working away and it gets to, what often happens is it gets to like 5 or 6, and then I'm aware of the fact that she's finished doing what she's doing and we're going to have dinner together. So, but I have heaps more to do in my head. And I'm like, I know that I have heaps more work I have to do, and I could sit here until 10 p.m. and keep working. But I think, but I probably should go up and have dinner with Jam, because we did talk about doing that. So I'll go up and we'll have dinner, but I'll be kind of a little bit resentful because in my head I'm like, I should be working. And I don't communicate that to Jam. And instead I'm not completely present with her. And she can tell, like she's so intuitive and she can tell that something's up, but I don't say anything because I'm the harmony monster. and so I just sort of I take that hit, wear it as a badge of honor, thinking that like, by not saying that, I'm going to give Jam the dinner that we agreed on. Not give Jam, but like have dinner with Jam like we agreed upon, and that's the better result. But what I'm now realizing is like it's like I've got to say something, because then I know, because she's told me so many times. She'll just be like, just tell me and just have dinner quickly and go back and work. Like, it's fine. But is my inflated ego thinking that my presence is so important and necessary in her life that she'll be devastated if I go back and work, which is not true, because she'll be wrapped. She can just keep watching Real Housewives.
That story is almost, I could just replace me in that story, and it's like so accurate to how I feel. It's ridiculous how similar.
You've got Soph, and Jam is my partner.
So replace both. Replace both names. I feel the same way about Jam. The other thing I wanted to say, I should have said this earlier, but it's hard to jump in. I thought what you said, Em, about just being aware of it is so incredibly powerful. It sounds like such a small, simple thing, but I imagine that so many people, myself included, drift through the day not realizing what we need, and like being able to label that, I need to go for a walk for 20 minutes. I need to be able to do this thing is so powerful, because I reckon there are so many things that even now being aware of this concept, I think I need to think a bit more about what I need.
Has he frozen or has he stopped talking?
I thought that was a end of a sentence that works, but maybe
I think the upwards inflection, it didn't feel like a. Yeah. But yeah.
No, I agree with that. I think it's really good. I think we've presented Em some professional challenges today, because she's made it very clear that she's not our therapist.
Yeah, I know.
The three of us have come to the table with our own personal issues, and we've presented them to you, and you've done very well not to. I was thinking we could rename this. I've listened back to your first two episodes a few times, and we could potentially rename this "I'm Not Your Therapist," because you've said it a few times.
I probably don't need to say it anymore. No, but honestly, I think what you're all saying is not. I mean, this isn't. I mean, I'm a human too, so this is like, I think it's really relevant for everybody. And I can't imagine there are people out there that don't resonate with really what we're talking about here. One of the things that kind of stood out as you were talking was around how much the kind of need to please ties in with self-worth and caring for others. So sometimes, I see this a lot actually in therapy, is that they're like, if I am not a carer, then who am I? If I'm not a carer, where is my worth to other people? And I think that can be a really kind of tricky thing to navigate.
What do you mean when you say carer? Like if I'm not someone who's there for other people?
Yeah, if I'm not continually people pleasing, if I'm not continually going above and beyond, if I'm not putting everyone's needs first, then who am I? What is my identity beyond that?
I imagine that would be, this as the only non-parent in the room saying this seems wrong, but that feels like a potential role or identity you could give yourself as a parent as well. As being like, if I'm not the person looking after this child, then who am I?
Absolutely.
I can imagine it's very prevalent for people who are not working full-time and for a full-time parent, that they would go into a rabbit hole where they feel that that's the only place that they have worth, especially.
Yep. And that's certainly where resentment builds up, and the feelings of anger, the feelings of loneliness, emptiness, all that sort of stuff starts to show up when it feels as though this is all and the only thing I do is care for other people. Yep.
Wow, this was way more relatable than I was expecting. This episode, thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on, Dr. M?
Well, I wonder if we've got a little bit of time, if I should quickly mention, I guess, what we do with that.
Yeah,
yes, please.
Because I had a question. My question was, it was actually Ryan's first question was, how do we actually put this into action? And you started off by saying, be aware of the feelings when they turn up. I imagine so many clients of yours will have this issue, and that's probably the first thing you say, be aware of it. But then how do you actually take the next step and go, and here comes my truth. I'm about to say something or do something.
Yep. So to kind of go backwards a little bit, I would really, and I mentioned this kind of in passing before, but I would really check in when you say yes to something that you genuinely actually don't really want to do, how does that feel in the body? And so often it will be, because there is this activation of the fight or flight response, there can be a feeling of anxiety, or there can actually be a feeling of heaviness and like a literal slumping of the shoulders. It's like, oh, okay, I will do it again. But in your experiences, if you can think about times when you have provided like a wholehearted yes, like when you're like, yes, I really want to do this, how does that feel differently in the body? And I think so having an awareness of how your moment-to-moment experiences are showing up in the body is really, for me, pretty paramount. Slowing things down. So one of the biggest, I guess, entry points into putting in some boundaries or being assertive is to ask for time. And so what I mean by that is if people are requesting things of you and perhaps you really are aware that you don't want to say yes, my kind of, I guess one of the biggest suggestions is to just say, you know what, I can hear what you're saying and I think that sounds really important. Let me think about that and I'll get back to you. So like the power of a maybe.
But just buy yourself some time.
Buy yourself some time, yeah. And in the buying of time, what can, kind of gives us some space to really check in with how do I genuinely feel about this? Is this kind of request lining up with what I value? Is this request going to cost me? And that line between where is selfishness and where is self-care? Does that make sense?
That is absolutely. Because yes, so often for me, the initial response is like, oh, well, they've shown interest. That's a nice thing to ask to want to do that thing with me or ask me to be part of this thing. So my initial instinct is like, oh, it would be rude to say no or rude to reject that offer. So I'll just say, yeah, okay, yes, that sounds good. But then like 10 minutes later, I think like, what am I doing? Saying I haven't got any time to do that. And as a result, I know who's going to suffer. It's like the people who I don't mind saying no to. It's the people like Jam or whoever. And I can go like, well, actually, they asked me to do this thing and I can see you anytime. And so I kind of don't prioritize the people really close to me because I'm more comfortable saying no to them. And instead, I'm doing this strange thing that I don't really want to do and is costing me quality time with someone I love.
Yep. The other thing that I think can be really important is
So to summarise, so be aware of the feelings that pop up for you. When those feelings arise, you can buy yourself some time before you give an answer straight away. If you put on the spot, just buy yourself some time.
And that's specifically if you're being a request is being made of you. The other part of this is in terms of your close relationships. And, whether you do this in conjunction with a therapist or whether you kind of really want to make your own kind of work around this, I suppose, is really enlisting and letting the people in your life know that this is what's going to happen. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, saying to your partner or saying to your family, I've really noticed in my life that I say that I work very hard for your approval and I say yes to a lot of things that actually sometimes don't really work for me. So letting the people know that I'm actually going to see if I can change this a bit. So in the next little while, you might hear me say no to things that perhaps I've never said before. So it's like kind of prepping the people in your life to know that I'm going to try and make some changes and to be aware that this is going to happen and maybe even to support me in that.
That's great. Yeah, that's really cool. So giving people the heads up that your approach is different and not to take it personally because this is just something I'm doing generally. Yep. So when if a no or even a maybe comes back, don't take it personally. It's because of this greater thing that's going on.
I also really like that because it happens not at the point of conflict. Like you're not having that discussion at the time when you want to say no. Yep. You're foreshadowing it at a time where I feel like you'll be more emotionally and just in control and not as worked up.
Yep.
Love that.
Doing it also. So the way I did it with Penny, when my psychologist said to me, you need to say what you need. So what I did was I went home and she said, how was your session with your psych? And I said, oh, it was amazing. We talked about how I don't ever really speak my truth that much, like in different situations in my life, whether it's at work or even at home sometimes. And straight away she was like, hang on, what do you mean? And I said, oh, just that like I explained the session but didn't tell her what it was. And she was like, what are the things? And I went, oh, it's really hard for me to say it. This is not natural. So, and that even bought me a bit of time. And then like when the kids were down, I was getting dinner ready and Penny came downstairs and she goes, so what are they? Like she really wanted to know from me what they were. And it's still really hard to do it, but I kind of prepped her a little bit in saying that. So maybe people listening to this could say to their partner, oh, I heard this podcast today and they're talking about harmony versus truth. And I realised That's really true with me. Like I choose harmony with us all the time.
Yes.
And it's sort of, and then then it gives you, it's not out of the blue. It's like I heard it on the podcast. Or maybe if you're listening, maybe if you and your partner listen to this podcast, or you both listen to it together, or you both listen to it, you could say to each other, are there areas of our relationship where you're choosing harmony?
Yeah. I mean, if you're listening to it together and you've got these issues, it must be really awkward. It must be really awkward in the car right now.
I picture him, for some reason, I picture him sitting there with like that, with like a headphone each in the ear. Like just
But hopefully, if it's awkward, hopefully at least it seems a little less foreign, because it is very common. It is very common, I think, with partners. Yeah.
Can I just add one kind of caveat to this, and that is just being really aware that people-pleasing and choosing harmony in relationships where there is control or violence is actually very adaptive and a necessary thing to be doing. So just kind of keeping that in mind, if anyone is listening to that potentially if you are in an abusive relationship or a controlling relationship, that the pleasing and the appeasing is keeping you safe. And so I would really encourage people to get some support around how you navigate that kind of context. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
That's a beautiful point. And that's, when you said that, I was just like, well, this is what we got, Emily. Like, that's such an important thing. And what do you mean support though? Like, where do they go for support for that? Because I wouldn't know where to start in that situation.
So I really realise at the moment it's very difficult to find psychologists that are available. But there are plenty of online support programs that can be really helpful, and perhaps I can forward some for the show notes actually.
Please, yeah.
Because I think you need to find a place of support to help you, well, first of all, to feel safe in your relationship, but also to be able to find a way that you can get some of your needs met. And that's a whole nother podcast, episode around working out whether relationships are safe for you to be in or not. But just, I guess, something to keep in mind. There's plenty of online resources available, or even kind of telehealth options too, if people need a space to talk that through.
Great.
Thank you, Em.
Thank you, Dr. M. Once again, I just got a lot out of that ep, so thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
I feel like that was such an important conversation, that it was so new in my age. When I first heard about it, age 41, it was life-changing for me, and I reckon you may have provided that with a lot of people today. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Em.
Thanks,
Bye.
Em. If this episode has been triggering for you, we strongly recommend Lifeline on 131114. The Imperfects is hosted and co-produced by Hugh van Cuylenberg, Ryan Shelton and Josh van Cuylenberg. This episode was produced by Bridget Northeast, edited by Jamison Moore, filmed by Andy Poole and social mediaed by George Martin. A special thanks to Dr. M for her expertise and guidance. We'd also like to thank the Resilience Project for their ongoing support. Our acknowledgement of country was delivered by Marley Silver, and you can find Marley's podcast Chicks and Balls on all the podcast platforms.